Welcome to Field Notes. Michael, you are here for maybe a last episode. Is that true?
That is true. You're stealing my thunder already on my last episode. I was going to share it as one of my fun facts. So I'm going to be changing roles to work as an agronomist in private industry. It will be a good move, hopefully. Um, and the entire industry of agriculture is apt to benefit from my work. And so,
Very humble. That's what, when I think of you, I think of
yes.
humility first.
Yes, most people do. The Humble Michael is my
Yeah.
nickname in these parts. So glad to be here. What are we talking about today? Well,
We are talking about transitions, on-farm transitions, talking about transitions to organic and a generational transition from one generation of farming to the next. And we have father-son duo, Darren and Junior Eichelkraut, who are joining us today. I'm really excited to talk with them. But before that, you have a pertinent or a fun fact for us about organic in Wisconsin.
yeah, for sure. So you can't steal it from me entirely. I still got a fun fact for everyone. So this is coming from Wisconsin Public Radio. And the fun fact is Wisconsin is second only to California for the state with the highest number of organic farms in the US. So, did you know that?
I did actually. I did know that.
Pretty mind-blowing.
Yeah. And California is a much bigger state, so a lot more
Yes.
farms there. So that I mean that's a pretty incredible fact. And we've got some organic farmers on to talk with us today. Like I said, Darren and Junior, who farm near Paoli, Wisconsin, just southwest of Madison. They farm about 50 cows, dairy, and they transitioned to organic several years ago. And they're going to talk to us a little bit about their story. So, Darren and Junior, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourselves and your farm?
Okay, I'm Junior Eichelkraut. I was actually the fourth generation to own and operate our farm. Our farm is a century farm. It was a century farm in 2021. My great grandparents actually purchased it in 1921 for their son, one of their sons, to be able to take over his own farm. So that's how it got started in our family.
This is Darren Eichelkraut. I am currently running the operation with my wife and two kids, and Dad is still fully involved as far as helping out with milking and tractor work. We run about 280 acres tillable, with about 200 tillable acres owned and another 80 rented. We are mostly a forage based, as far as 100 acres of grass, alfalfa, hay, about 100 acres of pasture, and usually between 20 25 acres of corn, all harvested for high moisture shell corn. I don't do any silage. Um, Triticale is a big crop of mine that I take all the way through to grain. We combine that. I feed that to the cattle. And the goal of the farm is basically to be self-sustaining as possible. I purchase very little inputs. That's kind of the basis of our farm.
Great. Yeah, thanks for that introduction. I love the insight on minimizing spending on inputs, especially right now during a time when inputs are so high. And so that bottom line is really important. Um, I just want to like set the scene a little bit more for people that are listening to this. And so you guys mentioned that the farm had transitioned to organic at some point. And so could you talk a little bit more about what the farm looked like before that transition and what the motivation was behind that transition to organic?
At the time, I was farming it same as basically the same as it is now. There were obviously some differences in that we were still spraying chemicals on the land and for the crops, and also using things such as lutolites for the cows and antibiotics and everything. But with the turn of the century, things got a little tighter, So yeah, that's when we started to think that what are we going to do here? Because things got to the point of where our tenth of an acre of $3 to $5 a dozen sweet corn and my wife's beautician work got us through some very lean times. I mean, the milk had dropped in price to the lower teens and eventually got to $10 per hundredweight, which relates all the way back to my father's time when he was milking back in the early 60s. So replacing equipment got real difficult to take care of. So organic kind of got to be an option. And unfortunately, well, I shouldn't say unfortunately, I should say at the time, I knew it was a 3-year transition to get into it. I also knew that I was in my mid 50s already. So what am I going to do? And that's where the next generation come into play.
So I was off farm out of high school, left right away, and worked construction for a bit. And at the time, did not have interest in farming. It wasn't until coming back home and being away from the farm for a bit, just started thinking a little more about future and raising kids that it was, yeah, I'd like to come back to the farm. But I mean, our neighbors were all growing at the time, so competition for land was huge. I did not want to manage people. Other niche markets such as a creamery or marketing your own product is a whole mess in itself. And I didn't want to go that route. So kind of, lean towards the organic part of it. That was really kind of getting up and going at that time. So mom and dad said, well, if you're going to commit, we'll do the legwork. So luckily, I didn't have to try and start farming in a transition. They kind of took that hard part on, but I was committed at the time, so we learned the process together. So that worked out really well.
Nice. And Junior, can you talk a little bit more in depth about what that transition was like? You said, there's 3 years where you have to pretty much have a lapse in going from conventional where you can't, and then you can't spray or do anything that would violate the organic rules for 3 years, and then you can finally be certified. Can you talk a little bit about navigating that transition?
Certainly. The biggest thing was gathering information as to how do we go about this? Where do we start? Who do we contact to find solutions and products for our transition that help us, that we have to do and also help us along. And so we actually are, the organic convention in La Crosse was one of the big things, very major. And also our agronomists and nutritionists at BioEgg, they also held field days for organics and stuff. And so these were things that we started going to. And so once we got going to these, which was quite a few years, actually, I mean, several years, and we went to them after we did get transitioned too, but we learned a lot. There were very few farms around here. I mean, there was only one that was close by, and anytime I had a difficult question, they didn't have an answer for me. So it was a matter of trying to find someone to answer these questions. There were a lot of things to be taken care of. Weed control, I was kind of already there. We cultivated and rotary hoed already. That actually got a little more difficult as the years progressed, simply because our weed seed amount was was growing. Giant ragweeds were a huge problem. And so we had to cut down on row crops for one thing. Buffer zones were another thing we had to deal with. And at first, I just kept putting row crops in right up to the edge of the neighbors, and then separately harvesting and selling these row crops, which didn't amount to much because maybe I only had 30 bushel of soybeans to take to town and maybe 150 bushel of corn because it couldn't be used on the farm. So I had to get rid of it and prove that I did. it was somewhat of a hassle, but it could be done. Another thing is that we had all your diseases and problems that cows would have uh, that we no longer could use antibiotics for. We couldn't use the lutalize to get a cow to ovulate. Different things of that nature, and even finding vets that would continue to help us and have the knowledge to do the things that we needed to do differently. Uh, so there were a lot of things in that regard. One of the last things that we actually had as a major problem was flies. And the thing of it was, yeah, we could clean out and clean out and clean out, but when you got stable flies coming in from the pasture with the cows and horned flies that were, you know, uh, breeding out there and repopulating, what do we do with them? We no longer can spray. Well, we finally found out after about a year of struggling that mineral oil would work if you covered them with mineral oil, and they would suffocate and die, but that only takes care of that problem to a certain degree. So yeah, there were definitely some issues that we had to address, and information gathering was the big thing.
And I know that you all do quite a bit of grazing now. Was that always a part of your farming system, or was that instituted kind of after the organic certification?
A good question. So I never did stop grazing from my grandfather and my father. We always kept grazing. The grazing procedures actually are what transitioned. We got into smaller and smaller paddocks so that we eventually got to grazing, what the cows need just for this half of the day versus going into a 15-acre field and letting them go and cutting down on milk production while that pasture was getting the best was getting eaten off and they were getting less and less stuff they liked. So yeah, we actually had to transition that part of it, but we never stopped.
Yeah, you guys had mentioned in the transition process just the need for like more information and um even from grazing, it sounds like you've picked up on um obviously like more management intensive, like rotational type grazing compared to like continuous grazing. So I'm curious, and you already mentioned a few things, but um, were there any other sources of like information that you found particularly helpful? Like if I was a farmer listening to this podcast and I was maybe interested in moving to organic, um, were there certain agencies or organizations or individuals or groups that you felt really were impactful and helpful like during that time?
Well, things have changed quite a bit. Like I said, when we started, so we got certified the end of 2010. There wasn't a lot of products, a lot of resources. You had to really look for it. Where now I can very easily find information simply by searching online. And some of the best information comes from just your organic groups, say on Facebook or social media platforms where you can get involved in groups and just ask other peers what they're doing, what's working, what's failing. Um, Even a lot of your co-ops and stuff now have an organic division, or if they don't have it where you're farming, they at least have another location that, hey, that's what they specialize in. So resources are actually kind of easy to find now, and it's just a matter of finding what works for your practices. Most of my products that I get now for the cattle, I order everything through Leadstone. I mean, they're a big company that carries a lot of products, and they have a very big organic lineup. And there are several other companies that, right along with their conventional products, they have a whole lineup of organic. So it's not hard as long as you're willing to reach out and just ask, hey, this is my problem. It's not near as hard to find solutions now as what it was, 10, 15 years ago.
Through the years, a lot of, like he was saying, a lot of these companies have gotten some organic departments, which initially weren't there in many places. So yes, it has expanded in the more recent years, so that we can find things a little easier. But back when we started transitioning, I wasn't so savvy on uh, computers and internet and everything, and I don't know what all would have been available at that time. So, yeah, it's definitely changed.
Yeah, it sounds like there's quite a bit more infrastructure for navigating that transition than there used to be. One thing that you were talking about, I mean, it just challenges galore kind of with navigating that transition, but also the cropping system challenges you all had that started to emerge in that transition. And I'm wondering, kind of beyond the agronomic elements, were there challenges from a kind of generational transition as well that you all kind of encountered along the way?
Well, actually, when I took over the farm, my dad told me one day that you're going to take over the farm. We're going to write up a contract, and away we go. And that's how it happened. And he left for town and got a job, and that was it. So it was easy. It was not easy for me to take over in a few aspects, but for the most part, I had already been doing most everything. Where Darren and I, when we uh, did the transfer of or transition, excuse me, of uh, of our farm, we kind of had things well in mind ahead of time. And boy, I tell you, as far as problems with that, no. We started out with a promissory note drawn up by a lawyer, of course, and registered with the Register of Deeds that he would buy all the livestock and the machinery and the feed that was on hand, rent the farmland, and that's what we did for that part of it. Once that was paid off, then he started purchasing the part of the farm. Our farm is split by a road. There's 100 acres on one side and 150 on the other. And so the set of farm buildings is on the 100 acres. And so he purchased that. What year was that? Do you remember?
3 years ago now.
About 3 years ago on a land contract. So that's what we're doing right now is having him purchase that part of the farm. Uh, and when that is taken care of, he will purchase the other side of the farm. So really, there were no problems with transition because he is the boss. Uh, I am only there as an advisory person. Sometimes my information that he gets from me is it's kind of thrown right out the window because nah, Dad, that's not gonna no, that doesn't mean anything. And then other times it's like, oh yeah, I never thought of that part. So it's been great in that department. There's been a great easy transition.
Well, and we communicated from day one. There was no, I know this and you're not going to know this type of information. It was, if there's a question, here's the answer, here's what I know. We kind of set up expectations from the beginning is because dad still, I paid him once we switched. So he became a paid employee. And I know I had heard of other farms transitioning where, well, one day dad's in charge and he makes all the decisions. And the next day he says, well, no, that's your responsibility. You do it. And so we tried to just keep communication open so that there wasn't that stepping on toes and, you know, getting worked up about things that really aren't important. So that's been big, is just communication.
Yeah, I mean, I want to almost double down on that and say how important that is. Just really stress that like communication and from the get-go and also way before you're thinking about doing this too. I hear a lot of stories about farm transitions that have not even happened because it got to such a point of conflict in the end and that farm is probably not going to continue on in that family, which is, really, really sad, but it's hard to navigate that transition. Sounds like you all having that communication from the get-go was super important and very clear and open communication. And I'm just wondering when you how long before the actual transition of the farm where Darren bought um, you know, the livestock and the equipment and started renting the land, had you started to talk about that transition? You know, how many years prior did you kind of load that conversation and open those lines of communication?
Well, that would have happened when you first, it was a very eventful day. I mean, it's something when your dreams are realized, when your son tells you that, oh, I plan on taking the farm over and raising my kids here. Well, I'd have to say it kind of took off from there. And when that would have been at least probably 2006, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I was working at Ace Hardware at that time, and uh, my mom, who had always worked on the farm, had just started a full-time job, and that was kind of the transition of bringing me in. But I was starting, once we made that decision, it was okay, when I can afford them, I'll buy a calf, a heifer calf when it drops. And that's my calf. Dad's going to raise her. She's going to be a part of the herd and he's going to cover the feed and everything. And when she has her first calf, that calf becomes mine, but the milk is his. So I started to build a herd. Um, Also, when we needed a new piece of equipment or something needed to be updated, I would make those purchases. And that gave me a relationship with the bank that I still have today. So when time came for me to start making really big purchases, they didn't bat an eye. It's no, we've been working with you for almost a decade already. And this is, I mean, I didn't have to write up any business plans or anything. It was just, you want money? Here it is. But that was built up slowly over time, just as the cattle machinery were. So when that first promissory note came, I think I owned the entire heifer herd at that point and a couple cows. So that was not a huge animal purchase. And I had, I don't know, a tractor or two at that time, the milk cooler, a couple things. So that really helped that initial payment not being so large and me having a little ground to stand on.
Awesome. Yeah, I love hearing all the insights you guys have about like that generational transition, and kind of just like what your personal experience was with it. I want to backtrack just a little bit to organic. I guess I'm going to backtrack, but I also want to look ahead into the future. And so, you guys have been doing this for a while now. So, um, what could you just run? I mean, we've already started talking about it just naturally in conversation, but like, um, would you mind just running through like what you've seen the biggest benefits of being organic are, or maybe even what some of the biggest maybe disadvantages are in your mind right now? And maybe you can speak a little bit like the on the management piece, like on farm, but also speak a little bit into what your experience has been like on the organic markets.
Yeah, well, obviously, our primary reason for going organic, the initial reason was financial. And like I say, at that time, during the transition period, we were getting $10 milk. And when we finally got certified, I had three milk companies that wanted our milk, and all three of them were on my doorstep at one time after putting me off for a whole year when I could have been certified because the milk markets had all kind of crashed to a certain degree. That first milk check that came in before December's milk was a double milk check. It was such a wow, here we go. And so obviously financial reason was the number one starting reason. But since then, we have learned so much about organics in general and come to realize that, okay, our soil is much healthier. We have a good soil life out there. Therefore, our plants are healthier. And therefore, our animals are healthier. And things that we're eating and not being exposed to chemicals like we were before, we're healthier too. So the health is a big issue that we've seen, and so it's been both of those things. We do enjoy talking with other people that are organic and what they've accomplished and the things that they've seen also. So it's been great in that regard.
Something that's kind of shifted in management from when we started till now. I used to sell a semi-load or two of organic corn, used to do soybeans. We'd roast them on farm. Every once in a while, I'd get to sell a load of soybeans. I mean, organically at the time, corn was at $10 a bushel. These soybeans were going for close to 20. It was great, but we were running our equipment nonstop. Dad and I were on cultivators. We were out pulling. It was ridiculous. And my family was just starting, and I was missing out on, my daughter being a baby, and kind of looked at some other farmers that were doing less as far as cropping and systems like that, and took a step back, and I tried a year without growing any corn. Kind of rationed off what I had, so I didn't go completely grain free. But I found in that year's time a great middle ground, and found that you really, organically, the way we farm in our scale, I did better off financially doing less than trying to chase that production. I think in the beginning, our cows might have been averaging close to 70 pounds a day per head. Now I no longer grow soybeans. I do not purchase any protein for my herd. I grow about 25 acres of corn. That gives my cattle usually close to about 12 pounds of corn a day. So we've cut that back. My production for cattle is down to right around 50 pounds is an average per day. My components are up, but the more I have simplified things, the better off we are, and actually financially the better off we are. It was terrifying not having those semi-loads of grain to sell those first couple of years. Is how am I going to afford things? Well, I do purchase fertilizer for my land, but since I wasn't putting all those row crops in, I've cut way back on that. The fuel I consumed, the lubricants, the wear items. It was amazing cutting back what that cut out that way. And then just time in general. I have time now. So management has changed drastically, as far as, rather than trying to force your hand with nature on how much can I take from you, it's more so, what can I work with, and what can I get out of what's available? And so that's what's changed. And my cattle are much healthier. I rarely have a vet come out. It might be for a milk fever only, because I'm really struggling with learning how to IV. I can treat for a milk fever. I'm just no good at that. So that's about the only thing I have a vet come out for, is to IV for milk fever, and we vaccinate our calves. So a couple times a year for that. As far as the crops go, we're rotating continuously with the corn and the triticale. I don't get much for disease or pests. There's always those extreme years where, aphids come in and just wreak havoc on alfalfa for first crop or something, but it's not going to ruin me as far as the farm goes. So that has been a big shift. It's definitely still a struggle, like with these giant ragweeds. I walk every acre of my row crops and pull. Something that shifted that hurt us in the beginning was when we had a really weedy field. It was, well, we did our best, we'll harvest it and see what we end up with. That mentality ruined a couple of our fields. The seed bank is so heavy in them, I can't put row crops anymore. Now, if I get a field that I couldn't keep up with, I'll cut that corn down. If I can reach it with the cows, it is a blast to graze cattle in, corn that's about ready to tassel. Once you get them in there, they love it, and they will mow that field and the ragweeds down to, 6-8 inches of stubble. It is fun. And to hear your neighbors ask what you're doing when you're out there with a mower, just mowing down full standing corn, is kind of fun too. But we've learned that that's just, rather than letting those weeds go to seed and wrecking the future of that field, take a hit now. It's well worth it. So that has changed. Just sacrifice a little bit now to save later.
Certainly a lot less stress going on with the whole farming operation.
Yeah, I think that's key is being able to figure out the cropping system that works for not only your farm but your lifestyle, right? Um, and Darren and Junior, could you talk briefly a little bit about the cropping system you do have now, where you have triticale as an important part of your operation? You mentioned feeding high moisture corn, but the triticale is also important, and kind of where you see that going into the future as you think about, maybe not wanting to walk all the different rows of corn picking giant rags.
Yes, so the triticale started uh, simply because we used to put oats and as a nurse crop on our new seeding every spring, and that's how we brought it up. Well, with storms, weather, weed pressure, more and more, that was just getting to be a huge headache. Come time to combine those oats, was that they were down, they were green, full of weeds. It was a struggle.
We actually lost fields of seeding in that manner because the oats was down, it was weedy, and we just couldn't deal with it.
So I don't remember where, but had heard about triticale and thought, well, I'm going to get some. And as soon as we take our corn off, I'll run a disc over the corn stubble and throw the seed out and see what happens. It grew beautifully. It didn't take a lot of effort. The weeds did not come through it. Combined it, had, I don't know if we were getting around 60 bushel or so, with no added fertilizers or inputs. And those first couple years just had this seed. And so, well, what do you do with this seed? Everybody said, well, you can't feed it. The only thing you can do with it is stick it back in the dirt. So I found a couple guys that would buy it for cover cropping. And then I think after a couple years of that, it was just like, this is a headache. And I finally found some research from New Zealand, I believe, where they fed it, and said, this is great stuff. And tried, put it through the roller mill, started implementing it into the ration as far as, we feed our barn is a tie stall barn, and each cow is fed individually. So I just took a scoop and like, all right, let's try, maybe 4 pounds a day. The cattle loved it. They ate it all up. I didn't have any problems with it. I had it sampled or tested to see what we were feeding, and I don't remember exact numbers, but the starch is lower than corn, but the protein's a little higher, well balanced amino acids. So it worked great with the cattle. I slowly brought that up to where now, along with the corn, my cows are getting about 8 pounds of rolled triticale a day in addition to the corn. And I make my own heifer feed and calf starter, and that is strictly rolled triticale, oats. I buy a protein pellet to mix in with those, and then some salt and mineral, and that has really replaced a lot of the corn in my cattle's ration. I have yet, if you get a thin spot in the field, the giant rags may start to come up through it when the triticale is drying off, but they're thin, they're spindly, they never go to seed. It's not an issue. So that has helped allow us to be able to rotate fields that otherwise I wouldn't be able to do with a row crop because of weed pressure. I would like to, going forward, I just put some winter barley in this year to see how that goes, because that'll change our timing as far as harvesting and help split things up. But I would love to, in the future, completely get away from corn, not because I think it's a bad crop, but just because of the time consumption and the tillage needed to maintain a clean and healthy crop, and go strictly to winter small grains for getting the extra energy into my cattle. I don't have the equipment for silage, so that's why I don't go that route. My only obstacle right now from taking that next step is I just don't have the storage on farm. I would need to put up a grain bin to be able to put up enough grain for eliminating corn altogether. So that's kind of the only reason that hasn't happened yet, is just storage for that grain. But that is my goal, is to completely replace annual, or it's still an annual, but row crops with triticale and barley.
Well, I hope that winter barley comes back in the spring after we've had no snow cover and it's been pretty dang cold.
Well, I planted it under your supervision, Will, so if it fails, you know who to blame.
Yeah, yeah, that's gonna come back to bite me. But no, I have confidence in the winter barley. Um, but we'll see. Well, Darren and Junior, thank you so much for your time today, having this great discussion about transitions on farm. We really appreciate talking with you both.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Before we go, I wanted to mention the Transition to Organic Partnership Program that seeks to fill the void that Darren and Junior saw in their transition to organic. To learn more about resources on organic transitions from UW Extension, reach out to Ariana Abrecia. Thanks for listening. This has been Field Notes from UW-Madison Extension. My name is Will Fullwider, Regional Crops Educator for Dane and Dodge counties, and I was joined for a final time by my co-host Michael Geisinger, Outreach Specialist in Northwest Wisconsin for the Nutrient and Pest Management Program. A great big thank you to Michael for helping to come up with this idea for Field Notes, and we will miss him dearly as he goes on to his next chapter. Also, a big thank you to Joe Ryan for creating our theme music, and to Abby Wilkie-Maki for our logo. If you have any questions about anything you've heard today or about your farming practices in general, reach out to the Extension Agriculture Educators serving your region.